Hello, this is an introduction to the Deliberative Survey, which is a new kind of collective intelligence system developed by Mark Klein at MIT. The challenge that this system addresses is the one that solving complex problems in today's world typically requires integrating the input of many experts and stakeholders. And so the question is, how can we effectively enable such deliberation at large scale? And the time-honored approach for doing these kinds of collective decision making are basically some form of conversation, um, either face-to-face or digitally mediated, but conversations in general face severe limitations as tools for doing effective deliberation at scale. For one, and this is particularly true for synchronous conversations, that they tend to be very expensive and slow. Given that only one person can contribute at a time, that can be incredibly inefficient when there's lots of people involved. Just scheduling such synchronized meetings can be very difficult to do. Another important problem is the lack of structure that you know un, uh, that free conversations have. Conversations basically produce huge unorganized piles of comments from people. They're not organized typically by topic. Content on a given topic could appear scattered anywhere along the transcript. Um, and this has two impacts. One is that it's hard to ensure that you're systematically and efficiently covering the decision that you're trying to make. It's hard to ensure that you've covered all the important questions, systematically reviewed the possible answers, comprehensively assessed those answers with respect to all the criteria. And the result of all of this is that in addition to not necessarily covering the topic well, it can also be hard to find what you need. Imagine you have a transcript of a large, of a conversation with a large number of people. How do you find the parts of that conversation that relate to the decision you want to make? Potentially, you just have to read the whole thing. Another important problem with conversations as a tool for deliberation is that there are perverse incentives built into using conversations, incentives which undercut the quality of the deliberation. And one is that when you have many people discussing a topic, then they are all engaged in effect in an attention war, where they're trying to get their own ideas, arguments, and so on, um, you know, uh, recognized and accounted for. And one way, and a commonly used way to try to win these attention wars, is both to repeat your points as well as to extremify the points so that they're more attention grabbing. These are individually rational in terms of getting attention, but they undercut the quality of what's being said, both by the fact of redundancy and also the fact that points are being made more extreme, for example, than the data justifies in order that people notice them. Another perverse incentive involved in conversations is that people, in addition to wanting to solve a problem, also have an interest in protecting their group standing. And this leads to lots of pernicious phenomena such as self-censorship, where, for example, I may not mention an idea because I'm concerned that my boss or my peers may not agree with it. It could also lead to clique formation and groupthink. So all of these produce suboptimal results from a deliberation perspective when we're using conversations to do that deliberation. The deliberatorium is a tool that has been under development at MIT since 2007, which fixes these problems using a simple and logical process that we call deliberation mapping. This is a snapshot of the tool, and the basic idea is that instead of conversing, users collaboratively create a knowledge structure that's made up of questions, answers, arguments, criteria, and ratings. It's logically organized rather than just organized temporally. Um, it's easy to avoid redundancy. All the content on a given topic will be co-located in the same place, just like books in a library would be. In this approach, people can work in parallel and if they like asynchronously, so there's not any of that single user bottleneck. And in the work we've done to date, we've used human moderators to help ensure that the map is correctly structured as people add stuff. We have applied this for a wide range of problem types. And the two main types of, of problems that we mostly encounter include problem diagnosis, where we're trying to understand, the causes of a problem, and solution generation, where we're coming up with ideas for how to make things better. And deliberation mapping is equally effective at both of those types. So as I mentioned, the tool was initially implemented about 15 years ago, and we have conducted um, roughly 15 years of evaluations since then, with over 10,000 users coming from engagements with industry, education, and government, with large and small companies that include Intel and British Petroleum and Siemens, the Federal Bureau of Land Management, and so on. And these evaluations have shown that the Deliberatorium produces one, high quality summaries of the knowledge of the crowd as compared to conversational type tools. Higher quality, um, more comprehensive, more compact, and much better organized. It's also robust in the sense that it works effectively even with highly complex and controversial topics, the kind of topics that tend to create messes with conversational approaches. We've shown that it works at scales of up to um, thousands of contributors. We haven't tested with more, but we've seen no obvious breakage points that suggest that the scaling would be limited to that scope. And we've also shown that people can um, groups can work quickly because they're working asynchronously and in parallel to produce a summary of their collective knowledge much more quickly than what would happen if, for example, you had a set of meetings with the same people. So this brings us to deliberative surveys. Deliberative surveys are a next generation crowd-scale deliberation system which is designed to transcend some limitations in the deliberatorium that I just described to you. One of them is that we want to produce a tool which eliminates the need for user training. So people can, get up and running very quickly. The second is that even though the moderation process in the deliberatorium is not terribly burdensome, it still represents an overhead cost, and we have wanted to radically reduce the need for human moderation when using the tool, while still getting high quality results. Finally, we have been looking at how we could maximize how much knowledge you can get from the crowd in a given amount of time, maximize the throughput through something we call attention mediation, which is essentially drawing the attention of the participants of the crowd to the parts of the map where they can do the most good. So deliberative surveys have made a lot of progress in terms of achieving these objectives, and they do this via two key innovations. One is having a simplified survey-like process for people to follow, which consists of just three relatively simple key actions. One is where people propose an answer or improve an existing one. A second is where they critique an existing answer. And a third is where they vote on a set of competing answers to assess which ones are best for the current challenge. The second key innovation is the use of AI-based moderation tools that serve several purposes. They help users organize their content correctly when they enter it into the deliberation map, which is something that human moderators were doing in earlier versions. They automatically help avoid redundant and toxic content. And they do intelligent attention mediation by guiding users to the questions, answers, and arguments that most need particular input. So let me just give you a quick example of using the deliberative survey. These are all snapshots from a running system. So in a typical run, this system would start by showing you the question that we would like you to look at. And the questions, as well as the criteria for what represents a good answer, are specified by the deliberation customer before the survey is run. So it represents the framework for the crowd to provide their input. And then you'll see that in the upper right, there's a right arrow labeled Next. The Next button makes use of AI tools to make personalized suggestions for which that particular user's next deliberation action should be. So, it will depend on what the map needs as well as what the user's skills have been shown to be from previous uses of the tool. So when a person sees a screen, they've processed what's in it, they click the next button. And in this case, it'll bring them to a screen which asks them to propose an answer to that question. And AI comes in here as well, because when somebody proposes an answer that is possibly a duplicate of one that's already there, the system uses state-of-the-art neural network technology to detect semantically redundant posts and ask what people want to do about it. After adding an answer, a person might be asked to critique an answer that someone else had proposed, and users critique answers by adding pro and con arguments that describe how well the answer satisfies each of the different assessment criteria. In this case, the question is about, what should I have for dinner? And the criteria are healthy and tasty. So the arguments would capture, for example, whether or not salmon, in this case, is a healthy choice. And here again, AI tools sort of automate the role that used to be taken by human moderators. For example, in this case, the moderator is pointing out that the user looks like they proposed several ideas in their suggested argument. And one of the rules of deliberation mapping is that each post in the map should consist of a single idea. So it could be rated and debated about clearly and individually. So these, bundling is one of the possible kinds of structural issues that can occur. Redundancy, as we saw, is another. Toxicity is a third. Finally, the third main action that people will be asked to do is voting, where they're asked to assess the relative worth of the different answers that have been proposed by the different members of the crowd. And users can assess the answers by looking at the collection of the pro and con arguments that came from the whole community. So they can benefit from other people's perspective on the ideas. And when they vote, they also checkmark the arguments that they considered compelling when making their voting. And so both the votes as well as the statistics about which arguments were compelling to the crowd can inform a manager who's making a decision based on the crowd's input. And of course, it could serve as the basis of a democratic decision-making process. The result of all this is a compact, logically organized, quickly and collaboratively generated map of the wisdom of your crowd.